And a warm welcome to everybody. This is a great session, and we're really pleased to be able to focus on Reimagining Care, the title of the Commission for the Church of England's Archbishops of Canterbury and York session, which is being chaired by Anna Dixon. And Anna, I'll be passing over to you shortly to give an introduction to this. As Jerome highlighted at the outset, please do tweet about it, do share any information about the session and put questions into the chat box. We're joined by a fantastic panel from a variety of backgrounds, and in addition to Anna, we're joined by Chris Swift, Director of Chaplaincy at Methodist Homes, and we're all really keen to hear more about some of the work on digital communities and the campaign Methodist Homes have been undertaking around fixing care for all. We're going to also introduce Sharon Wilson. Sharon has been a long time presenter at various HousingLIN events over the years, but we're very much pleased that she can join us and talk about an exciting programme that she oversees with colleagues about community circles and extra care. We've put the spotlight on community circles as part of our work on CollaborAGE, and similarly the work that Michael Roberts at Extra Care Chapter Trust in his work on building steps to connection. Again, you'll hear a little bit more about that and the tools that he's developed with residents and staff at the charity. And last but no means least, warm welcome to Kay, Chief Exec of Age UK Bristol, also a friend of the HousingLIN, and thanks very much in the past for hosting various events at your offices in Bristol. And you're going to be talking about some of the work you've been doing called One Small Step, very much all building in about different models of care and support to reimagine the way we can support local people and local communities. So if you do pick up on any points that you want to raise, please, as I said, the Twitter handles and Twitter hashtags are here, and we really welcome further dialogue with you so we can feed in to the Commission's work. So Anna, without further ado, can I pass over to you, and you can take control of the screen.
Thank you very much, and I would just like to particularly thank Jeremy and Jerome for putting this fantastic session together and hosting this webinar for the Archbishops Commission on Reimagining Care. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other case studies, and I'm sure are going to give us lots of great ideas for our work. So I'm Anna Dixon. I, until recently, was the Chief Executive of the Centre for Ageing Better, and I've worked really for the last 20 years on health and social care, and been thinking about whether it's about the research in a university, about policy making, working in the Department of Health, and also working independently at the King's Fund. It's always been about how can we improve health and care based in research and evidence. And over that period, so when I first started at LSE, there was the Royal Commission on Long-Term Care, and we really hoped that this would be the moment when there would be reform to social care in England. Well, of course, here we are, 20 years on, many reviews, even legislation, and still, unfortunately, many people, both living with disability and in old age, not getting the care that they need, want, and indeed are entitled to. And so when I was asked by the Archbishops of Canterbury and York to chair this new commission on reimagining care, I didn't hesitate to say yes. And hopefully you'll understand as we go through why I'm really passionate that it is important for us all to take time now to reimagine care, to make sure that the funding and investment that we hope and definitely needs to go into social care in the coming years creates something better and that enables people to live their lives fully. So why did the Archbishops of Canterbury and York think that the church had a role to play in reimagining care? Well, Archbishop Justin, if I can just advance the slide, here we go. A few years ago wrote a book, Reimagining Britain, and in it he really looked back at some of the history of Britain and the welfare state and identified that many of our great institutions really had their origins in Judeo-Christian ethics and principles informing them, and indeed in church institutions. You know, if we go back to sort of monasteries and the creation of hospitals. So he was arguing really that we're at a pivotal moment again, and in fact with COVID, I think could sort of say that's even more more true now than it was when he wrote the book a few years ago. And that in doing so, we needed again to go back to look at what Christian theology, ethics and principles could guide us in that reimagining of Britain. And he noted in that book that social care, I think, as we see, in great contrast indeed to the NHS, really is very heavily based around, you know, class and wealth, whether you get care or not. And we've lost any commitment that there was. And in fact, social care, that's one of the problems, was never really part of that welfare state. So there's a lack of common good and solidarity between both the generations and between rich and poor. It's not consistent, it's not resilient, and it's not sustainable. And really the need as part of reimagining the future was that having a focus on high quality social care was going to be really critical. And so that was sort of the seed really for this commission. And then obviously more recently, Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, has been appointed, and really speaking very clearly that, you know, when there is dignity for all, when we treat each other with compassion, then effectively we're a better society. And we know that there are gaps. And one of those gaps is that people who are needing care, living with disability, are not being valued and loved in the way that they deserve. So these are some of the sort of sentiments, I think, and thoughts that were behind the creation of the commission. And we were set our terms of reference with this very clear purpose that we should develop a radical and inspiring vision for care that draws on Christian theology and tradition and reimagining care and support. So that's our purpose as a commission. So I'm an independent chair. I'm supported by the Bishop of Carlisle, James Newcombe, who is a co-chair. He's also in the House of Lords, speaks on health and social care on behalf of the bishops. And we are have a fantastic group of commissioners that have come together. And we have a secretariat in Lambeth Palace and at Bishop Thorpe who are supporting us with this work. We gathered for the first time over the summer. We've had a few, I suppose, private meetings to start to plan our work, and we hope in the next few weeks that we will be able to be more public and start to engage very much with very many people with experience of care, their carers, families and loved ones, with care providers, with commissioners of care, with housing organisations. And that's why we're so delighted to be on this webinar today, because I think in that reimagined future, if we do reimagine care and support, has to be a vision that incorporates our reimagined vision for housing. We're very fortunate in that actually there are other Archbishops Commission, there has been one on housing already that's concluded its work, making recommendations both to the church but also to policymakers, and we will do the same. So this is an independent commission. It is to make recommendations to not only to government but to society, but also recognise that there may well be a renewed or new role for the church, as the Housing Commission did. So we're thinking about, as I've explained, care and support, both for people in later life and adults with disability or disabling long-term conditions. We are using, I mean, the commission members are of all faiths and none, and we will be welcoming input and want to learn from all Christian denominations. So it's great to have Chris from Methodist Homes on this webinar today. We will be engaging with other faith communities to see what they're doing and how we can learn from them. But we are looking with a Christian theology and ethics perspective to really try and see whether what the values and principles should be to underpin this reimagined vision for care. And we want to be practical and make recommendations. We're also going to consider the wider issues about the status and well-being of those with care needs. And as I say, we will be making recommendations also to the church. So that's some of the aims of the Commission briefly. We've decided to organise our work around 4 work streams. So we have a theology work stream to help us grapple with that. I have to say it's been quite mind expanding as somebody who has spent all of my professional life working in a very secular way, although I have and am a practicing Christian. That has never come together. So it's very interesting for me to bring these 2 worlds together. We want to think about systems of care, particularly from the perspective of users and carers, both paid and unpaid. We will be having a work stream specifically to look at the role of church, faith groups and community. We think that in a lot of the past discussions about care and support, there's been, I guess, a dichotomy between what's the role of the state and what's the role and responsibility of individuals and maybe their families. And I think, you know, you hear that debate in the political discourse as well about the role of the state versus individual and family. And the missing piece is probably community. I think if we are going to reimagine care, whatever government comes forward with in the coming months about what a renewed role for the state might be and what that offer is going to look like, and we hope it is a more generous offer than the current offer, nonetheless, for people to live well, the importance of community, and I hope that's what we're going to hear about today, is how housing organisations are helping to support communities that provide care and support for people. And of course, we will want to develop a way of putting that vision into practice by looking at public policy funding and other reforms. But we're going to come to that last rather than starting there, is our plan. So just a bit of the timeline. As I say, we've been laying the foundations for the Commission's work over the summer months. We are getting ready to launch some initial thoughts on these principles and values, and to have a period of engagement where we want to listen to stories to help shape that vision. In the sort of quarter from January to March, we'll be drilling down a little bit more to understand examples of care in action. And so again, we'd love to be hearing from you if you feel you've got some really good examples of care in action that we might be able to do case studies or visits or hear about. And then as we turn our thoughts in April and June, like how would we turn that into a reality for people everywhere in England, as we then draw our conclusions together next summer to publish, we hope, in September. And obviously we hope that we won't just be publishing a report. Well, I was going to say that gathers dust on a bookcase, but these days it's stuck on a website somewhere, and you know, if you're lucky, you might find it when you're searching. We want to really follow through and make sure that we've built support for implementing those recommendations and creating impact. So that's our plan. So just to give a heads up, we haven't launched it yet, but we will be later this month. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from all sorts of people, your residents and tenants, to really get a sense of, you know, what is good about care and support currently. We must, you know, try and find those things. And as I say, that's not necessarily just about statutory care and support, but all the things, all the care and support that helps us to live a good life. But we know we also want to hear the hard truths about what's both difficult, challenging and missing from care and support currently. As I said, I think we feel that this Commission has a fairly unique role to think quite carefully about the role of community, including church or faith communities of which people are part. And then reimagining, it's hard. We're so stuck in a heavily rationed, very limited view of what care and support is, and indeed the range of housing options that people can choose from, you know, many places are also very limited. So we wanted to try and think of a way of freeing up people's imagination. So this is a trial question. We haven't finalized it yet, but you know, if your wishes were granted, or indeed if you were of faith and your prayers were answered, what would care and support look like in future? So these are some of the questions that we're going to be launching later this month. But if you'd like to keep in touch with what we're doing or make a contribution, there is an email there, reimaginingcare@lambethpalace.org.uk, and we also have a website which I will post in the chat. But delighted to be here at the start of our work, and really, really keen that housing is a key part of it. We've specifically got Debbie Anstead as one of our commission members who has a long track record in the past as well, working in and around issues of housing. So we look forward to hearing more today. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think you've also got my former boss, Richard Humphreys, as well. So, and a few others. So I think you've got a really great selection of people there. We've put a number of things in the chat box as you've been talking as well, which relate to both some of the housing points that have been raised in the past, and you mentioned an influential report that came out earlier this year. But I'm going to quickly pass on to Chris, and welcome, Chris. He's our next speaker, and really delighted that you can share some of your work that's taking place in Methodist homes. I don't think you've got slides. You're just going to talk from the hip.
I am, I'm afraid, Jeremy. I hope that's okay for everybody. And it's great to be with you. Thank you, Anna, for introducing the work of the Commission. And I think because of what you've said, I might just do my 2-minute tour of MHA's history and development for those who don't know, because a lot of it really resonates with some of the things that Anna was saying in setting up this happy hour today. For those of you who don't know, MHA, Methodist Homes, has been in existence since 1943, but I think really the origins of MHA lie in the First World War, and that in the 1930s, a particular Methodist minister called Walter Hall was visiting a lot of women in particular who were single and not attached to any source of income or investment. And one of the phrases he picked up during that time is that people felt they were one piece of bad luck away from the workhouse. And it touches on the point Anna made about practical solutions, and Walter Hall was a very practical cleric, and so he decided to do something about it and to persuade, cajole, nag the Methodist Church into creating an entity that would begin providing residential care and then retirement living for people who are in later life. And I think the thread I would pull out of that story and bring into the present is really around fear. Walter Hall was meeting a lot of people who were genuinely afraid of what later life would mean for them, what getting older and the kind of care to which they would have access. And today MHA is a very different organisation in many respects. Although we are Methodist Homes, that's in our title, in many respects we are a secular and we are an independent organisation that has continuing links to the church. I write an annual report about the organisation for the Methodist Conference, and one of our trustees is nominated by the Methodist Church, but in all other respects we value our heritage and our origins, but we are also an organisation that is very open. That's been there all the time, but in fact there was a debate in the early days, were we Methodist Homes for the Aged or Homes for Aged Methodists? So we could have been HAM, but we're MHA. So there was a conscious decision that this was a piece of social action by the church that was for anybody in the community to avail themselves of the care that we're providing. So bring things up to date, and we operate around 70 retirement living schemes as well as care homes. We also have something that used to be called, well, it's now called, it was Live at Home, it's now MHA Communities, which is helping people find connection and support where they are. So there's 3 strands really to what we are continuing to do. During the pandemic, which has focused our minds really on innovation and change, clearly a lot of direct contact and support for people didn't happen in the way in which we were used to it happening. And that's where the digital kind of offer and development in MHA has come from. So MHA Communities began developing digital opportunities for people in later life to have programs prepared and shared for them that particularly had their needs in mind. So that might be from gardening to cookery to reflections offered by some of our chaplains. And we actually redesigned our headquarters to include a digital studio, so that we actually have the internal capacity to offer some of those resources to people. And when I've gone round, both immediately really after the pandemic, when visiting became more possible, it struck me there was a real difference, I think, between retirement living and care homes, in that care homes had continued to be communities. People had still been able to meet within lounges, for example. They'd still shared meal times together very often. So they were communities that were in isolation. And it struck me when I went to retirement living that often I was encountering communities of isolated individuals. And when I went to do some video recording in one of our services, two people met as part of that need to prepare some video content. And they're on different floors of the same scheme, and they had not seen each other for a year or almost a year. And I think the degree of isolation that has happened during the pandemic has been very notable. And our development within digital is something that we're designing. It's not by any means a perfect substitute for being with another person, but it is making connections. It is enabling people to continue their interests along the lines that I've discussed with, whether it's gardening, cooking, whatever it may be. We're very open to working with those who belong to MHA communities. And people in retirement living at MHA, many of them belong to MHA communities as well and have access to that kind of content and interaction as well with people. So we've done a tremendous amount of work really to try and reduce social isolation and loneliness for people in later life. I say Eleanor Puttock, our digital chaplain, couldn't be with us today. But that was one of the innovations that we have done as we reviewed what our spiritual care offer has been for people. When the pandemic came, we discovered that about 20% of our chaplains in retirement living and care homes were actually over 70, so they immediately themselves isolated and could only provide support and care at a distance. So as we looked at our ability to provide good, high quality content for people that was useful, that wasn't just filming something that was happening in a physical context and showing it to people watching over the internet, but doing things that were more intentional and designed, we decided that one of the things that we would invest in was actually having a digital chaplain. And if Eleanor were here today, she'd say it's not she's an avatar or a creation, a virtual creation. She is a real person, but she has skills within the development of digital content. And Eleanor's role really is to be able to help chaplains extend their role to people by preparing themselves digital content and that can then be shared with people across MHA and indeed outside MHA. So two of the things that are examples perhaps of this that we developed over the last 18 months. One was an annual day in the Methodist Church called Mha Sunday, which the Methodist Church observed for many decades as a way of supporting MHA. That would normally have happened in person in June 2020, and it couldn't. And so we prepared a digital content, both for those within our services, but also for relatives and for people who are interested and supportive of MHA to join us. And on that Sunday afternoon, we had over 2,000 people joining live. And since then, with the video content being on YouTube, we've had over 4,500 views of that material. Drawing in things like our music therapists, of course, which is a great additional resource and medium to use with our digital capability. And the other one, and I don't know whether any other providers have done this, was to hold a national memorial event over video for MHA on the first Friday in September. We've now done that for 2 years, in September 2020 and last month. And this really was to meet a need, because normally our services are very good at holding annual events that mark the memorial and the remembrance of people who have lived within our services who've died in the previous year. And obviously the poignancy of that with COVID became even more apparent. often relatives would come to our services to mark that, and again we knew that that wasn't going to be possible, so we actually prepared content to go online with a national 2-minute silence at 11 AM on that morning in the video as it was shown, and so it was viewed within lounges, within care homes, and by individuals within retirement living, as well as relatives had that opportunity to join with us. And again, that's been a really very effective way for MHA to kind of visualise and experience ourselves as an organisation, because our services are dispersed across England, Scotland and Wales. But this was an occasion where we all came together as an organisation to mark memorial and to be together. And I think using those digital resources has, well, certainly the feedback that we've had from the field has been that even after hopefully we get out of the COVID crisis, that this is something that we will continue. So it's emerged during the pandemic, but it's something people feel expresses our commitments and values, and I'm sure that wouldn't replace within homes and schemes when they can hold memorial those opportunities locally, but actually doing something nationally has also been of value for us. All of that also feeds into our campaign for fixed care for all, which has been something we've launched this year to try and encourage influencers, politicians and those who are very passionate about the sector to campaign for a more enduring resolution, particularly to the injustices around funding. And I began by talking a little bit about the fear that Walter Hall encountered in individuals as they contemplated later life. And I have a great concern that we're returning more and more to that being the case when people look about and think about how they're going to fund the kind of care and support and the later life that they would wish to live in our society. And therefore, we're a very strong campaigner, as well as to the Archbishops Commission, and for supporting and calling for a fresh vision about how we do that in all sorts of different ways, rather than have the inequalities that are already present there in society and just appear as though they will get worse over time. And again, as we draw people together using our digital technologies, we are hearing that this is something that people are anxious about, whether they will have the resources to find the kind of care they need in the future, because obviously one of the great things about MHA is we're encountering people in very different stages of aging. And although there is a lot of individual difference within this, we could say, for example, that for people over 60, perhaps 60 to 70, that might be our MHA communities, either meeting locally or engaging with us online. Over 70, it might well be within retirement living, and over 80 and indeed over 90, often care homes, nursing homes and dementia specialist care. So we have within the services that we operate, as it were, the full story of aging from 60 onward, from 55 onwards in terms of retirement living. So we draw on that experience and the things people share with us and their apprehensions and their hopes about the future as they get older, and certainly that is fueling our desire to see greater justice and fairness within care and support for people as they age, and in a way that just hasn't changed over the arc of MHA's nearly 80-year history. That it is that concern that led to our creation, and we see that concern today. And yes, we will respond in what ways we can using innovation such as digital opportunities to connect people and to support them. But we also there is change that is required outside of MHA to make this a fairer offer for people at whatever stage of aging they are. And I'm afraid we don't feel that the things that the government has announced in recent months go anywhere near far enough in meeting that need or providing that plan that will help people have greater confidence about the future. I think that's probably enough for me to say at this point. I know we've got a Q&A a little bit later to come on to, Jeremy.
Chris, thanks very much. Really illuminating and also very interesting to think about that digital connectedness, especially during COVID, taking that further forward as well, both within MHA, but as part of that Fix Care for All campaign. Can I just remind delegates, please do post questions either in chat or in particular in the Q&A boxes, and we will come to those later. But I'm going to quickly move on and welcome Sharon Wilson from Community Circles and some of the work they've been doing very much with local community groups within an extra care setting, initially I think in Wigan, but branching out rapidly. So Sharon, over to you.
Thank you. Bear with me. There we go. Sorry, I couldn't see the top of the screen. Hello, everyone. My name's Sharon. I work for a national charity called Community Circles. And today I'm going to share with you a short presentation about circles in extra care. So you may have heard of us before, or you may not know very much about Community Circles at all. In a nutshell, circles connect people to the things that matter most to them. They aim to connect them to other people, and they also aim to connect them to the community. Back in 2018, Wigan Council asked us to come and work alongside them with the aim of embedding circles at 3 of the extra care settings across the borough over a 2-year period, and that's where I came in. At the beginning of the work in Wigan, we had a very, very traditional community circle model, and that was a model that was built around an individual person. It focused on what mattered most to that person. We would look to involve friends and family, people who mattered in that person's life, and they would invite them to a monthly meeting, which would be facilitated by a volunteer who would support those conversations. And we would look at a series of actions to move that person close to doing more of those things that were really important to them. One of the things that was really significant in extra care that was really different to this traditional model straight away was that the people that were identified by care and support managers as potentially benefiting from a circle quite often did not have those friends and family networks around them. They were quite often very, very isolated. But we would start from the place where the person was. So usually those circle meetings would start off with myself, the person and the volunteer, and we would go from there, and that was absolutely fine. Over the next couple of months, circles bent and flexed considerably in extra care. We now had a number of these individual circles up and running, but what started to happen was we lost a number of volunteers over those first couple of months. And actually that was for very natural reasons, but we also didn't have a lot of new volunteers coming through in the right areas for the extra care settings that we had. However, I could see that people were making really great progress with their circles. And so as a connector, I started to facilitate those individual circles. Whilst that was really challenging, it was also a great opportunity for me to start to find out a lot more about people's life histories. And people were telling me so much about the experiences that they'd had in the past. They were telling me about the things that they knew about, what they could really bring potentially. At the same time, we had a number of people who really could benefit from circles living at the same settings, but we didn't have any new volunteers coming through. What was happening was I could also see there were some patterns in the things that people wanted to connect to. So for example, I would be baking individually with one lady, and we had 5 or 6 people at the same setting who also wanted to bake. And I had a bit of a light bulb moment there. And I thought, hang on a minute, we've got people here with lots and lots of experience and skills, and people who really want to learn a little bit more about this particular thing. Could we start to bring them together in a bigger circle where they could come together on a regular basis around shared interests and enjoy the same things together? And so that's exactly what we did, and our first bigger circles were born. Over the next couple of months, we continued to grow these bigger circles, and I continued to facilitate and co-facilitate those circles. So some of the people wanted to be involved with supporting others. A little bit of that peer support model started to happen as well. However, in the last 9 months of the project, we knew that this wasn't going to be sustainable long term. We always say we have a bit of a rubbish business model at Circles. You know, we come along, we tell people what we know, and then we move on. And the project was not going to last any longer than 2 years. And so we had to look at a way to make this model sustainable. Extra care managers were telling us that Circles are so great, they're not just the cherry on the cake, that the whole cake, and we really want to embed the principles of them throughout the whole of our organisation. And so we started to think about the other assets that we had in the settings, our team members. We didn't have activity coordinators in the settings where we were working in Wigan, but we did have team members who had previously been facilitating different sessions. And so they were our first port of call, and they were the first people that started to get involved with facilitating these bigger group circles. As we move forward, care and support managers started to have conversations with the local authority to think about how they could move away from purely time and task and really incorporate circles into the fabric of the organisations. And so more and more team members, we started to look at their skills and talents and think about how we could match them up with group circles. And longer term, it was going to be a much more sustainable model for us that way. So I always kept in mind what was important to people, and we were starting to see a really lovely sustainable model forming. The other thing that I always kept in the back of my mind was this quote from Roosevelt, and it's do what you can with what you have where you are. We never ever had conversations with people about personal budgets, and we didn't think about throwing lots and lots of money at Circles. You know, we didn't really want to think about people contributing that way. People can contribute in so many other ways to a circle, but we weren't reliant on money. And so we really started to think about, we've got lots of assets here, these great spaces and people that can bring so much. So how do we really do more of that, what we can with what we have where we are? To bring some of this to life for you, I thought it would be really good to share with you a story of a gent that I worked with in Extra Care. And so this is Pete's story. I'd love you to meet Pete. And care and support manager told me a little bit about Pete before I went off to meet him. She told me how he was spending the majority of time in his room. He would spend a lot of the day in bed. Team members would take his lunch out to him, so he didn't come out at all for his lunch. And he would stay in bed till around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, at which point he'd get up, go out to the pub for a couple of hours, come back and go straight back into his room again. Pete did not have any friends or family networks around him, and he didn't get involved with anything at all that was happening within the settings. She also told me that when Pete did have conversations with care and support staff, he would always talk about dogs, and there was something that he was really passionate about. And so I had a great starting point when I went off to visit Pete. As I entered Pete's room, I could see that he had 5 photographs lined up on his sideboard. And as I went over to chat to him, I asked him about the photographs, and he asked me to bring them over. And he taught me through each one in turn. He told me about the first dog that he owned when he was younger. He told me about dogs that he'd had as he was growing up and he was a teenager and got a little bit older. When he was 18, he joined the armed forces, and part of his role there was to train dogs. When he later left the armed forces, he went off to work on a farm, and part of his role there was being involved with sheepdog trials and training dogs as part of that. And so dogs have been a huge part of his life. And what he wanted more than anything was to have dogs in his life again on a regular basis. And so that was exactly where we started with Pete. We started to look at a series of actions to think about how we could start to connect him back to dogs again. And we had a chat with him to see, would he be interested in doing a little bit of volunteering? And he said to us, you know what? I can't walk around really well, so I wouldn't be able to walk the dogs. But you know what? I wouldn't mind getting involved with feeding them, doing a bit of mucking about, helping a bit with training. That'd be great. I'd be up for that. And so we went off and we had a chat with some local dog charities. about Pete doing a bit of volunteering with them. And to our dismay, they told us that they wanted people who were a little bit more mobile and a bit younger. And we were thinking, oh my goodness, Pete's got so much skills and talent here. Real shame. But we didn't deter us. We started to think about other ways that we could start to connect him to dogs instead. And I was on Twitter one day, and one of my colleagues down in Brighton had tweeted out about this particular organisation called My Doggy. And the idea with My Doggy is people are going somewhere for the day, they might have a hospital appointment, or they might have to go somewhere, or maybe they're going for a weekend away, and they need somebody to look after the dog. And they're matched with a local person who can support them by looking after their dog, a bit of a reciprocal arrangement, really. And so I had a chat with Pete to see, would he be interested in registering with My Doggy? And he said, yeah, I'd be up for that. And so we started that registration process. However, it was taking us a little bit of time to find the right match for Pete with the dog. And so I'm sat at home one day and I'm looking at my Westie Sam sat in the corner, and I suddenly had another one of these light bulb moments, and I thought, hang on a minute, could Pete borrow my doggy? I was going to Pete's setting a couple of times a week, and I thought, oh, you know, Sam was really, really friendly, really loved being around people, and I thought, I'm sure that Sam would enjoy that as well. And so I went off and had a chat with the building manager to see, could we get the permissions in place so I could bring Sam in to visit Pete? And we got the permissions in place, and the following day I popped off to see Pete and see how he felt about me bringing Sam into work and see about starting to visit him. And he said, I would absolutely love that. And so the following week, Sam made his first visit to Extra Care. He brought with him his little lunchbox and his bone and his blanket. And actually they hit it off straight away. Sam loved being around people, and Pete was in his element. As time moved on a little bit, we noticed that Pete wasn't exactly sure when Sam wanted to go out. And so we did a one-page profile for Sam so that Pete could really understand Sam's support needs and when he wanted to go outside. Over the next couple of months as Sam had been visiting, we really started to see a significant change in Pete. Pete was really, really adamant when he knew that Sam was going to visit, that the team would remind him and let him know. And he said, I want to make sure I'm up and about in the morning. When Sam's coming, I want you to get me out of bed, make sure I'm ready, cup of coffee in front of me so I can be ready for when he arrives. And you might remember me saying right at the beginning there, he really didn't get out of bed at all during the day. That was fantastic to see that he really wanted to get up and about and be ready for when Sam got there. Although Pete couldn't walk very far, because he now understood when Sam wanted to go outside, and he didn't live very far away from the communal gardens, he actually started to go outside with Sam, and he'd sit and have a fag on the bench and Sam would be running around everywhere. And as other people were coming out into the garden, Pete started to chat to them, and he started to form some lovely natural friendships with other people who were living at the setting whilst he was out there. I'd previously met with Pete's alcohol worker, and he stopped me in the corridor one day and said, Sharon, I've just been in to see Pete. He said, and I can't believe it. He said he spent 95% of his time talking about your dog and only 5% of his time talking about alcohol. It's fantastic. When we asked Pete what he thought about spending his time with Sam, he said, I love your dog. I even dream about him. Now we knew that me bringing Sam into Extra Care was not going to be a long-term sustainable solution for Pete. But what had been happening was, over the months when I'd been bringing Sam in, actually I couldn't go through reception without somebody running over, wanting to stroke Sam. Team members were coming over and having a chat with me saying, you know what, I'd really love to bring my dog to work as well, to start to spend some time with people. And Sam had become a little bit of a mascot at the setting. And so we had some conversations with the care and support manager and the building manager to see, could we think about potentially our own Borrow My Doggy scheme, where team members could start to bring their dogs to spend time not only with Pete, but also with other people who were really showing signs of really enjoying spending time around dogs as well. Sometimes we see a ripple effect with somebody's circle, and that's exactly what happened with this one of Pete's. You may remember me mentioning near the beginning of the presentation there that Pete had been in the armed forces. And one of the things that he used to do quite often when we were sat chatting was he would tell me about his time in the armed forces. He would tell me loads and loads of stories. At the same time, I was also working with another couple of gents at another setting who had individual purposes and individual circles, just like Pete, and they would also be telling me about their time in the armed forces. And I'm thinking, you know what, I'm a veteran's wife, but I'm not a veteran. So it was great for me to be able to hear all of these wonderful stories, but it really struck me that could we bring these three gents together to start to have a natter about the time in the forces and being veterans and build a little bit of that camaraderie again. It was something that Peter talked about missing as well after he'd left the forces. And so I had a conversation with each of the three gents individually to see would they like to start to come together and just have a natter as veterans. Would they like to have an afternoon together and come and have a chat and a cuppa? And they all said yes, we'd be up for that. At the same time, I also knew about a veterans hub that was getting going in Wigan. And I'd had previous contact with them. They'd been a veterans group that had come along to support this hub getting going. And I knew the guys there, and I got in touch with them and said, would you come along and have a chat with our veterans on this particular afternoon? Come along and have a natter with them. But could you come and share some of the support that you could also offer to them longer term? And they said, yeah, definitely. And so we got our three veterans together with a couple of gents from the Veterans Hub, and it was a roaring success. They had a cuppa together, they laughed and they chatted. And at the end of this particular afternoon together, all three of our veterans said, we'd love to do that again. It was really, really great. And so off the back of that, we started to set up a monthly veterans circle where we brought our three veterans together. I started off being the facilitator for this one. And actually what the guys wanted to do was just come together and chat. We did do the odd quiz, yeah, because they like doing a quiz as well. But actually they really just love coming together and being part of each other's company. And actually Pete was a fantastic storyteller and he was always cracking a joke. So it was a really great afternoon. Now, long term, again, we knew this wasn't going to be sustainable with me facilitating this particular circle. However, I did find out that we had a team member at the setting where Pete lived who used to be in the armed forces as well. The current support manager had a conversation with that particular team member to see how he would feel about coming along and being part of a monthly veteran circle. And he said he'd be happy to come along and do that. And so long term, we had a little bit of support to keep this going as well. We also had the support from the Forces Hub out in the community. We found out that they had a fishing group running and they had their own transport. So if any of our veterans wanted to go along and do some fishing with them, they could support with that. We also found out that they had a weekly veterans breakfast, and the current support manager talked about getting some transport in place. So if any or all of our veterans wanted to go to that, they would support with that as well. And so again, thinking about that long-term sustainability, it was really the teams within the settings that were going to support that and the teams within our communities as well. We had some great feedback about our veteran circle as well from our gents who were involved. One of them said, it's great that there's something for us. And another said, I'm so glad that someone is interested in our armed forces journey. So lastly, I just want to take a quick look at the benefits and contributions of Pete's circles here. Well, he had some new great, when we look at the benefits first, he had some new great friendships that had been formed, both from taking Sam outside and nattering with other people, and also from being part of the Veterans Circle. He was definitely less isolated and had a great shared purpose with the other gents. And we also had some great links to wider support as well. When it came to contributions, the team were absolutely fantastic. They made sure that they brought the veterans together, knew the days and the times that those veteran circles were going to be running. And they also supported Pete to be up and about when Sam was going to come and visit. Meg, well, I just did a little bit of facilitation at the beginning and made those links to the Veterans Hub in the community. The Veterans Hub were great. They came along to chat with us and offered some of that long-term support. And the team, well, they offered that ongoing facilitation and also support for the gents to get across to the Veterans Breakfast. So that's the end of my presentation. And thank you very much for listening.
Sharon, that was great, and I was just struck that how it followed on neatly from Chris's presentation. It was very much around creating sort of connectedness, and again, that sort of the work you do there is very much about trying to build the capacity and the resilience, and you know, at local. And while you focused today on vets, I know it's beyond vets in terms of veterans, but you may also come across Dr. Mha Wilson at Northumbria University, who does a lot of research in vets housing and social isolation. So I'll put some of her details in the chat box shortly. There have been a couple of questions come through from Michelle at that 13 housing group. Don't answer them, but do have a look at them, because one I think is directed at Circles and the excellent project that you do. I'm going to quickly move on, because the point that we've heard very much already today is around making those connections and connectedness. And Michael, that's a good segue over to you and the work you've been doing called Steps to Connection. So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy. Let me share my screen now. Just bear with me a second. Please let me know if you can see the slides that I'm showing from beginning. Here we go. Is that all visible for you?
All good.
All good, great.
That's perfect, yeah.
Okay, so I'm Michael Roberts. I'm going to talk to you a bit today about what we're doing in the Extra Care Charitable Trust to build communities. I'm the project lead for our Engage Lives project, which is a community building project across our villages. We run a series of retirement communities across the UK, independent living retirement communities, and I'm going to talk to you about what we're doing to help our residents move beyond loneliness. So here you can see an image of our Solihull village. So this is a newly opened village on the edge of Birmingham, and as you can see, it looks very presentable, looks so lovely. This is one of the sort of promotional pictures we use. As you can see, this is advertising an open week. I couldn't find a picture that didn't have that piece of text on it, but it just shows that it's very newly opened. And as you can see, it's completely empty in this particular picture. And this is because we took this before it properly opened. But there's still a danger of building large communities, villages like this, and then remaining fairly empty when it comes to the communal areas. You know, what's the point in building these giant communities if no one comes out and uses the communal facilities and makes connections? And no matter how long villages have been running, that there is this danger, especially as Chris was saying around COVID times. There's a particular concern in retirement communities that can we get people back mixing, engaging, and making the most of the facilities and activities that are out there. So how do we get people more socially engaged? One option is you just decide to put on more coffee mornings, more events. Often you find that the same kind of people come to those though over and over. So people who are confident to go to coffee mornings, they find it easy to mix with people, they'll come over and over again. But for many people, they aren't able to take that step. And even if they do want to come out and make connections, they might find it difficult to engage, or perhaps they do come out to a coffee morning, but what happens there, and does it really make a difference in the long run for them? I can think of just a resident I was speaking with recently who spoke about going out to a coffee morning, and she sat there on her own and no one came to talk with her, and she felt like she didn't really know how to engage, and that she felt alienated, isolated, and it really put her off trying to make those connections. So why is it that there are so many people who want to connect that aren't able to in their older age? We know there's so many people who experience loneliness in big retirement communities, no matter where they live, and the kind of obstacles, the root causes of this are often the same as people of any age, wherever they happen to live. And I just want to say a little bit about some of these underlying causes of loneliness that we're trying to work with in our project. So first big one obviously is confidence. People not feeling able to get out there and mix, feeling that you know, they don't have the confidence to invite others to do things, to even ask for support because they fear being a burden in their older age, and they don't have that kind of self-esteem that makes them realize that they really do deserve connection and support from other people. Obviously, mobility as we get older, physical health, a big one. Mental health, particularly anxiety conditions and depression. These are some of the major underlying reasons that people are lonely in their older age. Not having a support network, we might think that people who move to a retirement community, they are given this enormous kind of support network, but also many of those people might have moved somewhere completely different. Maybe they've moved away from their family and friends, their traditional network of people. And people's expectations about older age can be a really big factor here. So what do people expect retirement to be like? Do they have quite a literal conception of retirement as something where we gradually withdraw from what we're doing from other people? Or do we expect that as we get older, we get more lonely, or it's natural to be more disconnected or a bit lower in mood? So having those kind of expectations naturally brings certain kinds of behaviors with them, certain kind of thinking patterns as well. Perhaps thoughts that can be quite sort of pessimistic and along the lines that maybe people don't want their company, or people don't really want what they have to offer, because old people maybe don't have much to offer. This is something that people can easily fall into thinking. So we decided to, with our lottery funded Engaged Lives project, try and address some of these more deep root causes of loneliness to support longer lasting change. So as part of our Engaged Lives project, we've developed some sort of community building volunteer schemes where we're rolling out some befrienders that are really focused more on being a kind of empowering befriender. So when they leave, they're, rather than just having the resident feeling connected for an hour of the week, and then feeling, back to normal, they do things together where the resident is empowered and made more independent and able to sort of make those community connections by themselves in the long run. We've also been running some good neighbour schemes in the villages, and also what I'm going to talk to you about today is some peer support groups that we've set up to bring people together to help our residents, I suppose, identify and overcome obstacles to staying connected, these kind of more foundational obstacles that are predictors of loneliness, and doing this with one another's help. So here is one of our groups in Hagley Road Village. We have some lovely, friendly older men here, and an enormous amount of pictures on the wall. I've just realised that could be a bit of a dazzling display for some people, and curiously no pictures on the other wall. Anyhow, a lovely group of people, and what we do is we come together to discuss and share, first of all, vulnerabilities. So one major aim of these groups is to help everyone recognize that everyone wants to build connections, and that this isn't something to feel ashamed of, to find that there are obstacles to doing this in older age, and we explore some ways of doing that and overcoming those obstacles together. And many of the people that come along, they get to meet people they've never met, and some people they think are really confident, and when people start opening up, they say things like, oh, I wouldn't believe it looking at you that you think things like that, or you experience the same problems as me. And that is one of the major benefits of these kind of groups. And in this picture here, this was taken in the final week of our groups. We run like a 6-week course of groups, and this one was talking about finding purpose in older age by contributing things to our community. So we're talking about ways to share skills and keep our community healthy here. And we do this with the help of a workbook. So I thought I'd give you a few extracts from this. Here on the top left, we just see the topics we cover across the 6 weeks. So we start by looking at ways to construct a more positive vision of connection in older age in week 1. So what do people really want to do, rather than what are they told an older person should do? What's personally meaningful for them? That's the only kind of way of tapping into an authentic motivation and drive to connect in the remaining weeks. And we talk a bit about staying mobile, keeping our social networks healthy, staying aware of how many people we know, how healthy those relationships are. We talk a bit about how the way we think can affect our ability to connect with people, ways to stay resilient, address challenges through things like mindfulness, and is just a few extracts from the book here. So we've got some negative stereotypes about older age that we look to sort of bust some myths about. And in the top right here, we've got Shirley, who's someone who came along to our group. We try and have a real mixture of people attend the group. So some people who are quite reserved, lacking in confidence, and some people who still want to be more involved with the community, but are a bit more bubbly, are a bit more sort of easy to get on with, you might say. And we choose and invite these people with the help of our location staff, and really try and get people with a real mixture of personalities and interests to give a kind of a sense of what variety of engagement in older age is possible through all these different people, and to give people some role models here. So Shirley is a bit of a role model for others, but we still invited her because she wants to do more. She has her own obstacles and wanted to meet more people. And as part of this workbook, we have some sort of takeaway exercises for people to do. Here's one from week 2. So we asked people to draw a map of their social network and get thinking about how these relationships look, what we might do to nourish them a bit. So the author, Guy Robertson, talks about this process as safeguarding your convoy. So if you think of the people you know as those who sort of travel with you through older age, what are we doing to protect and support one another through that journey? This is one exercise to help us think about this. But then, of course, COVID came and we couldn't really run our groups in the same way. So in addition to sort of telephone, video-based support, balcony-based events, when people were stuck in their apartments, we wanted to use this opportunity to really reach out to more people with the content of our project. And also we recognize that not everyone is comfortable engaging this kind of content in a group. So we decided to create a kind of do-it-yourself version of the workshops, which turned into this 72-page book that we call In Steps to Connection, which is a kind of interactive guidebook for those seeking to strengthen their sense of connection and community as they get older. And this book extends the materials from the workshop with more reflective exercises, more interactive components to yield 10 steps people can take to boost their sense of connection and belonging. And I'm just going to give you a few little extracts here from the book. So in part 2, we have these 10 steps that people can take. And we wanted it to be something that people could just dip in and out of, try various things, put them into action, those that resonated most with them. And as you can see here, we've got the same social maps example from the workshop workbook, but with a few additions and some ideas on how to practical ways to nourish some relationships. So we think this is a really valuable resource. You know, we really want to get it out to more people. So if you're looking to find ways to build people's confidence, boost engagement in your communities, help get people out of apartments engaging in the facilities, we think this is a really good option. And we have it available for individual use. We've got it for sale in our retirement villages and our charity shops, but we'd really like other organisations to have the option of giving it to their service users or residents, potentially running events or groups around it. It doesn't require loads of time and resources. It's about freeing people up to build a kind of sustainable community. And it can also be used, you know, as a resource within a guided support package, especially when it comes to supporting others one-to-one, as a way to either structure that support or provide a kind of momentum and get people thinking between one-to-one sessions, which we know can often be the most difficult thing, sustaining that momentum. And we're able to offer this at a significant discount to any charity or organisation wishing to provide it to their service users or residents. So we'll welcome any interest from yourself, any questions about the book or our project, and please get in touch if you'd like to talk more about Steps to Connection. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Any questions, welcome at the end.
Yeah, Michael, thanks very much. I'm sure people will have some questions for you, both in terms of picking up to access the report, but also how that's made an impact in the work you've got at Extra Care Charitable Trust. And I was just sort of saying to Anna that we know Guy Robertson well from work that we've both done, both at Ageing Better, but also he worked with me at the Department of Health, and I'm sure Kay knows him from Bristol days as well. I think he was on your board for a period, so from memory. So without further ado, I'm going to make the next step, which is the step changes that Bristol have done, and build on Michael's work. And Kay, over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Jeremy. And as I find the presentation, I will say that, yeah, we're lucky that Guy Robertson is still a trustee with HUK Bristol. So really pleased to hear about his work. Lovely. So if I just find the... Okay, so I've got a fairly short presentation really. I just wanted to talk about the work that we've done in Bristol to help people to reconnect back into their communities, to connect with others, to continue with the activities that they enjoyed before the pandemic. We've done quite a bit of work in Bristol as one of the 14 Ageing Better areas. We were lucky enough to be funded by the Big Lottery over a 5-year period to tackle social isolation. And we have a programme called Bristol Ageing Better, which finishes in March, and we're spending this year embarking on spreading the learning across the country along with the other 13 Ageing Better areas. So we've done quite a lot of work prior to the pandemic on social isolation and how to tackle it, and then found that we were just completely taken aback. You know, almost the pandemic happened, the whole world changed. Everything that we'd done to connect people, to prevent social isolation, seemed to be focused very much on face-to-face engagement. And all of the things that we've done seemed at risk of being lost at that point. And I'm sure a number of you will recognise that feeling back in March 2020. What we've been doing throughout August this year is working with other partners, other voluntary sector partners in Bristol, to help people to identify the need to reconnect. And we'd found that a lot of older people had forgotten that was important. They'd been inside in their own homes for so long that some of them were afraid to go out, and just lacked the knowledge and awareness of how to connect with others whilst also socially distancing. So we tried to connect people in different ways, both face-to-face, in person, and where that proved difficult or a step too far for people, then we'd focus on virtual activities or connecting people online or over the phone through phone groups. And our campaign was very much focused on providing people with the opportunities to connect, but also through sharing a range of real life stories and experiences from others, because we found that by seeing somebody else do something, that connection with peers was something that enabled people to consider an activity, re-engaging, whereas they might not have done previously. Okay. So HUK Bristol is an independent local charity. We've been going for 25 years. We are part of Age UK National, but we are a franchise member, so we're a network member as opposed to being Age UK. We have a range of services locally, including things like an information and advice service for people over the age of 50, and also a day service. And this is a nice photograph of our day service staff in the pandemic, taking food out to older people in the local area. We found that at the beginning of the pandemic, our face-to-face services had to stop. The day centre closed. The advice sessions for people stopped. We couldn't get people to come into those, and we couldn't go into their own homes. And so we had to work in a different way. And one of the other big changes for us during the pandemic was that we found it surprisingly hard for the statutory sector services, our local authority partners in adult social care, or the NHS, our NHS colleagues. It was hard for them to connect to us in order to reach and support older people. Not really sure why that was, but the connections definitely seemed to just collapse in March. So a number of specialist organisations for communities of interest, and I think of Age UK Bristol as an organisation for a community of interest, older people, and equalities organisations. Those specialist organisations seemed at various times at risk of furloughing the majority of their staff and closing down, and disconnected from the conversations that were happening. And instead, we found local authority and NHS partners relying on volunteers. We remember the NHS responders. And the local authority focused quite heavily on connecting with mutual aid groups. And that was fantastic. That overwhelming support at the beginning of the pandemic is something that I think we need to hold on to. But of course, I think a number of us felt that could be fairly short-lived. And it has turned out to be, as people have gone back to work after furlough, the opportunities for people to volunteer and get involved has started to dwindle. And there are organisations like ours that are still working with older people. So right at the beginning of the pandemic, a number of organisations like Age UK Bristol, equalities organisations, specialist organisations in the city came together because we felt that there was a disconnect between people in need and what was and the statutory authorities. So we started to work together, the 8 of us initially. We formed something called the Support Hub for Older People, and we provided a range of support, whether that's practical, social or emotional support. We connected up with We Care Home Improvement, so we had home adaptations, we had a handy person service, we had Oasis Talk providing free 30-minute counselling to people who were very anxious about the pandemic. And Age UK Bristol provided the front end of that. We were a helpline, so people just rang our number and we would refer on to one of our partner organisations. Well, there are now 42 organisations working in that way. And far from feeling that the pandemic's kind of on its way out, and we no longer need to work together, we're actually finding that what we've created is incredibly valuable because it's enabling us to provide support in a different way. And we're continuing to work together and provide support to people. So I wanted to talk to you about the campaign, not just being an Age UK Bristol campaign. Rather, this is a campaign that we started as Support Hub members. And so the 40-odd members have worked together throughout August to encourage older people who are very much at risk of isolation and loneliness to get back out again in whatever way they could. We started off thinking it was going to be a grand campaign to kind of reconnect people to get back out. And then the numbers of cases of COVID in the city were rising and were quite high at that point at beginning of August. So we changed it into one small step to reconnect. And we've realised that that's actually a much more realistic way to get people to engage. So there is actually quite a lot of activity going on. There are quite a few things bubbling up again for people to join, but actually people aren't connecting. So the thing for us was to encourage people to do whatever felt comfortable. So we have found for some people, what is comfortable is to do something on the phone, maybe a group phone reading group, 6 people with a facilitator, regularly getting together, or art on Zoom, exercise on Zoom if possible, and anything we can think of to engage people's interests and to enable them to connect with others virtually or over the phone. For some people, that's been enough. We've had people who've given us have said to us that they just needed very small goals, and for one of our day service users, her carer, actually not even her, found that the goal that she needed was to actually just stand outside of her own front door because she no longer felt the ability to do that. She was too afraid to go out. So we've looked at various ways of enabling people to connect, whether that's in person or for those people who are extremely reluctant to engage, to doing that in other ways. We've also found that for people with very different needs, people with sight loss or hearing impairment, the thought of going out and not understanding social distancing or not being able to anticipate what others are doing has also been a real barrier to them engaging again. So the campaign ran for a whole month. We did a variety of things during that time. So we compiled 8 stories from older people about their experiences of lockdown and what small steps they'd taken to get back out into the community or to engage and connect with others. And we also asked them for their advice for other people. We then spaced those stories out over the period of the month and shared them widely on social media. And all of the Support Hub members did this. So the reach was really quite considerable. And we shared advice to people on getting back out, encouraging them to talk to others and to ask for advice or support if they felt that they really weren't sure. So, for instance, you can see an example on this page of the infographic that we sent out to everybody to make it clear that about the requirements with regard to masks. And we also shared updates on the activities that were available locally. And we ran a campaign through the local radio. We're invited back regularly to talk on BBC Radio Bristol. And we culminated at the end of the month with a session in which our staff and volunteers went out to parks in 6 locations across the city and took part in free Tai Chi sessions for older people. We invited as many people to just turn up to their local park as possible and engage, because we found that a number of people had said they were okay to be outside, but really didn't want to be in a closed environment. So I'd like to share some of the stories with you. One of those is Margaret and her journey out of lockdown. And Margaret spoke to us about the stresses that she'd experienced in lockdown. She was caring for her older mother and also her daughter who had learning difficulties. She and her family formed a bubble and were extremely careful due to the circumstances. And so when lockdown lifted, they'd been very, very careful. But Margaret found it that the thought of getting back out again completely overwhelming. So she and her daughter decided they would pick one thing that interested both of them, and they attended a Zumba class. They found that their fitness had deteriorated over lockdown. So there was a real reason for going. It wasn't just about social connection, it was about fitness. But she was sufficiently encouraged by that to then join our Tai Chi sessions. And we were running something called Tai Chi instructor training, by which I mean we would pay for people to have training in becoming a Tai Chi instructor themselves. So Margaret has actually undertaken the training, which was free, and it offered her a safe environment to learn a new skill, and that's improved her confidence. And she is now out and about setting up Tai Chi sessions herself, including one at the local Women's Institute. So she's actually giving back to others and encouraging people by her own experience and explaining that she too felt unsafe initially. So the Tai Chi has been quite a valuable vehicle for her. She's since joined a hiking group. Her advice has been prioritise the things that are important to you. Don't think about trying to not be lonely or to reconnect. Just think, what are you interested in? What's important to me? And do what feels safe. Different journey here. David lives alone. He found lockdown very difficult and isolating. He made sure, though, to go on regular daily walks, and that was the thing he focused on. And through that, he heard about some of the services set up by other Support Hub members, a community garden club, an allotment run by an organisation called Alive Activities. And the appeal for David was doing things outside because that felt safer. And he felt that that gave him the choice over what was comfortable. He didn't want to use buses and connect up with something, had to be something very local to him. So those daily walks during lockdown had really helped him to find something suitable. And his advice is similar to Margaret, I think, to take things at your own pace, to do something that you're interested in. And I suppose these stories show a number of different, a couple of approaches that possibly we might think that we would do ourselves. And in some respects, David and Margaret could be described as being people who've got the potential to get out and do something, to take that first step. But there will be people who don't have that within them for whatever reason. And Catherine is the final case study or story that I wanted to share. Catherine is somebody who is less able to get out and about. She's somebody with a disability that makes walking difficult, and her isolation has really damaged her confidence, and she was feeling quite isolated for that reason even before the pandemic. But she engaged with our phone group weekly. We have a facilitator who speaks with up to six older people, have just for a chat. It's a supportive, safe environment. And through that, Catherine has connected by talking to others about how they felt about going out and about. And she doesn't feel so embarrassed about her extreme anxiety. She started very gradually to do things such as sitting in the garden, getting the bus 2 stops, simply so that she's got a change of scene for a short walk around the neighbourhood. And so that's a very different example of somebody who just couldn't cope with getting straight out there and joining a club. So finally, what have we learned with our campaign? I think there's a need to provide virtual activities for older people who can't get out to those in-person sessions. I would very much emphasise the value of collaboration with other organisations, because I'm not sure that we would have achieved quite as much if we just did it on our own as Age UK Bristol. And what we found is that no door is the wrong door for somebody in a time of crisis. That enables us as organisations to make those connections for somebody and to find the right opportunity for them. We know that people will engage in the way that's most appropriate to them and at their own pace. So we need to allow people time and to think smaller if that's what's needed. The greatest success that we had and that older people had was when they did something that they enjoyed. And so we needed to find something that appealed to them. So it's about listening to people. And very much we found the need to encourage people to just talk about their feelings, even if it's to one other person, just to talk about them, to reduce the fear, reduce the feeling of embarrassment, and to enable them to think about just doing that one small thing that will help them take the next step. And so I think that's a bit of a quick tour around those case studies and the stories and the learning that we had in Bristol. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I just noticed that my video has stopped working, and so I'm just going to talk briefly, but I think also I'm going to hand over to Anna, because partly because I think in terms of the examples we've heard, Anna, are there things that you've pulled out which are very relevant to the Commission's work?
Well, firstly, thank you. Those have been just fascinating examples. And I think, my reflection would be that so much of the talk in our public policy debate about care and support, and the focus is often on sort of meeting people's very immediate physical needs. And obviously they are incredibly important. And, there are a lot of people whose immediate physical needs are not being well met. But obviously, I think in terms of reimagining care, and particularly thinking about some of the theology around, the value of life and how we help people flourish, that idea that to be, live the best life we can, then, what we've heard today is just how important those social, emotional, spiritual, psychological elements are. And I think we're hearing here a range of organisations from, obviously sort of the care home, retirement living, independent living and supported housing, or as Age UK are people living, I presume, largely in their own homes out in the community, how they are being, helped to sort of find ways with a bit of support. And it's interesting, sort of, don't say how little, but, obviously it is a resource. This doesn't come for free, and I'm sure as we look at what role the church can play, they have buildings, they have spaces where they could host some of these ways to connect. Maybe there are volunteers, but I also hear within this that, building that confidence and facilitating, as we heard from, Sharon, it does need a skill. So I think we need to sort of also recognise, one, the importance of paying attention to people's emotional, social and psychological and spiritual care and support needs. And don't imagine that that sort of just happens. It needs somebody to act, and we've heard some fantastic examples. So yeah, those are just my very quick reflections on all of those brilliant case studies. So very inspiring. Thank you.
Well, and thank you, Anna, for providing a helpful summary as well. I know we've got a few questions in the chat box, some of which I think have already been answered, but for those people who haven't had a chance, I know Michelle from 13 Group asked about sort of the sustainability and how to resource this. Sharon, have you got any sort of issues? I think, Kay, you've also highlighted the issues around volunteering and building those support networks. Do either of you have any immediate sort of comments on that?
And I know for us, certainly in extra care, the longer term volunteers weren't sustainable for us, so we had to explore another route. But something that was running through my mind really around that comment was that it's not always just about funding a connector. We know there's quite a large cost to that, but actually we have a series of different resources that can be accessed through circles, right from free resources on the website. So if you wanted to try some of the tools out and approaches, there's videos that run alongside that. We then do memberships, which are fairly low cost per year, you know, from £25 to a couple of £100 a year. And then we also do partnership offers, and we're working with a number of different organisations across the country at the moment. You can access training courses through that, so many days consultation a year. So it doesn't have to have a huge cost implication to be able to get started, start to look at some of the approaches and tools that we use.
Well, thanks. Do you have any comments?
I think Kay was coming in.
Yeah, no, as we say, if you've got any comments, yeah.
All right, thank you. Yeah, just to say, actually, picking up on what Sharon said and also Anna, that I think there's something about making sure that this is sustainable, that it's not, you know, if it's always going to be, if you're looking at inputs of staff time, it's never going to be sustainable. You can't kind of keep that going forever. But I think what I took from Sharon's presentation is that this is about enabling and encouraging and stimulating something and then moving away. And that's really good, because that's a sustainable model and it builds resilience. We're trying lots of different things in Bristol at the moment. I'm sure this is happening all over the country, but we're looking very much at peer-to-peer. So we're looking at how do you match two people with something, you know, with a similar connection or interest. And we've got a fantastic project. It's been funded by St Monica Trust in the city at the moment, where we've got somebody who's just absolutely brilliant at getting people to do stuff locally in their neighbourhood. She's amazing. I'd want her to work for me at some point, but she's got something called Grow Your Group. So she manages to set a group of people up together. She's with them long enough to get them up and running, and then she moves off, and they still think she's there. They can pick up the phone and say, is it all right if we do this next? What if we do that? And she said she's almost plate spinning, and she'll say, that's fine, off you go. And you know, all of the groups have sprung up. She's got a really good model for bereavement supports during the pandemic called STAR, which is Share, Tell and Remember. So we've now got lots of small bereavement groups popping up where people are supporting each other and talking about bereavement. And I think that peer-to-peer model is the key for me. But you're right, Anna, it does take that initial investment up front, because you need somebody really good at that to get things going. And then it's so much cheaper.
Okay, thanks. And I think you hit the nail on the head about that STAR model and end-of-life care. And that was something that came through an earlier happy hour that we ran with the hospice movement, and they're developing the compassionate neighbourhoods. Anna, I'm conscious of time. Do you want to say some final words, and then I'll wrap it up?
Just thank you. And please do keep in touch with what we're doing, and we will be, I'm sure, wanting to be back in touch with some of the organisations we've heard from today. But for those on the webinar or listening afterwards, you know, we will be really interested to hear about how the housing organisations specifically are supporting this type of care and support that goes, I think, beyond the physical and the practical.
Yes, I think that what's come through for me is it's not just about the disconnectedness that individual feels, but it's also sometimes groups and communities as well. So how you balance the sort of what I call the longing and belonging. So the longing to be part of the community, and then once you belong to that community, how you participate as well. So again, I think each of you highlighted a variety of examples on that. I'm conscious of time, and we're going to, I'm afraid we're going to draw this to a close. The slides and the discussion and the comments will be made available shortly, along with a recording of this afternoon's session. If you joined this happy hour and not been part of it before, we try and run these every Tuesday afternoon. And in fact, next week, our session is all about passive house and active ageing, which very much looks at the issues around climate change, low carbon homes and development, and managing our existing stock with climate change very fast approaching us as well, and zero carbon emissions. We want to have a look, put that under the spotlight. So that's available on our website. But on behalf of the HousingLIN, can I thank Anna, can I thank Chris, Sharon, Michael and Kay for fantastic presentations. Thanks very much for sharing your time with us, and we look forward to building on this with all of you. Thank you.